Hilchos Issurei Biah Perek Shisha Asar. The laws of forbidden relationships, chapter 16. Today we are discussing yet another category of people that are not allowed to marry into the Jewish community. Yesterday we spent time talking about the mamzer, the illegitimate child. Today we're going to move to a person whose male organ is damaged. Halacha Aleph. Pitzu adaka o krus shafcha, a person whose testicles are wounded or whose member is severed, shenasu bas Yisrael ubalu, who formally creates a marriage with a Jewish woman and has relations. Loikin, such people get lashes. Shenemar, as it says, and this is the verse at the center of today's chapter, Lo yavoi pitzu adaka uchrus shafcha bikal Hashem. A person who has wounded testicles and a severed member should not come into the congregation of Hashem. By the way, this is one of the very few places where there's a difference in the actual Torah scroll between different communities. In many communities we have the word pitzu adaka with an aleph, and in other Torahs it has a hey. It's not a pronounced letter, so it's hard to know.
Where one of the rabbis went to the
Yes, exactly. It says in the Hayom Yom that he checked it was an aleph. Yes, like our tradition, that he checked it was an aleph. No, practically the word still means the same thing, and also it's an unpronounced letter. So, if it's a pronounced letter, it's hard to have a difference. If there's a vav or no vav, this is an end of a word, aleph, hey. But in the Chabad community, we're very particular to have an aleph, because of this tradition that the Friedrich Rebbe went to visit Prague and he checked this old Torah and he saw that it had an aleph there.
So, question: having relations with these deformities, let's say, is it even possible?
So we'll see. If it's completely severed, obviously not. But there's going to be different cases where there's degrees, and so then it will be possible. There's another example where you see that people that are prohibited by negative prohibition, not just the relations gets them the punishment. They have to formulate a marriage. Like, it has to be first a proper consecration and then a relations. But they are allowed to marry a female convert or a slave, a maidservant who's been freed. Even if you have a Kohen who has wounded testicles, he could marry a female convert or a freed slave. Typically, and we'll see this more tomorrow and the next day, Kohanim have a lot of limitations on who they can marry, including a convert they cannot marry. But over here the Rambam says if a Kohen's male organ is not working, the holiness, he doesn't have his holiness. And so therefore he can marry a person who a regular Kohen cannot marry.
But not a divorcee.
Still not a divorcee. Even a woman who was from the Nesinim, that nation who tricked the Jews into thinking they were not from the 7 nations, they converted and the Jews basically let them in, but later when they discovered the trick, they demoted them from their full Jewish status. Usually a Jew cannot marry them. Here, this person can. Or a woman whose status is in doubt. We don't know if she's a mamzer or not. They can marry such people. Halacha beis, the reason that it's permitted is since this person who has a wounded organ cannot marry the rest of the community, the sages never decreed on people who have demoted status, like the Nesinim or somebody who is in doubt about being a mamzer. The Talmud has a very interesting source for this, because you would think if you can't marry a regular Jew, then certainly you can't marry somebody who's in doubt if they're a mamzer or not. So the verse says you cannot come in to the community of Hashem. So the Talmud says only somebody who you know for sure if he's part of the community or not. But somebody who's in doubt, these people with damaged reproductive systems could marry them. But a person who has a reproductive organ that's damaged cannot marry a definite mamzeret, because she is biblically prohibited. He can't come and override that. So now let's define these wounds. What constitute wounded testicles? It's a reference to the word pitzu adaka to the testicle portion. If they have a wound, a severed cut means it's the actual shaft that got a wound. There are 3 parts of the male reproductive system which could cause a male to be disqualified from marrying Jewish. Bagid, the shaft and the testicles, and the ducts, the tracts, where the semen develops, which are called in the Talmud the strands of the testicles. If any one of these 3 portions of the system was wounded or crushed, the apostle that's disqualified from marriage. Keitzad, what does this mean? Nifza hagid oy nidach. Let's first talk about the shaft itself. If the shaft was wounded in a way that it was caused to emit blood, it got a big cut, or it was crushed, or the entire corona, it means the entire tip of the organ was cut off, or a portion above the corona. Above, in halacha, whenever we say above and below, we refer to above means closer to the body, and below means further away from the body. So lemala me'atara means any portion on the shaft above the corona means closer to the body. Pasul is all disqualified. However, v'im nichras me'reisha atara, if only the tip of the corona was cut off, v'nishtayer mimena afilu kechut hasayra mukaf l'chalagid, then it remained, even a hair's breadth, a tiny bit of this tip remains, surrounding the full circumference of the shaft, kosher, it's still kosher. So it's interesting. If the entire corona gets cut off, that's disqualified. But if not the entire and a little bit remains, that's kosher. Nichras hagid l'mayla me'atara kikulmus oy kemarzev. If the shaft itself, above the corona, was cut off in a way, what's called like a feather or like a funnel. And this is a big debate in the Talmud how exactly we define it. But basically, we're going to go with one translation. Kulmus means like you sharpen a pen. When you sharpen a feather, they used to shave off on this side and on that side diagonally. So it means making a diagonal cut onto the shaft itself. Marzev as a funnel means making an indented cut into the shaft. In both of these cases, it's kosher because the entirety of the shaft has not been cut off. Halacha hey nikav lemata me'atara. If the shaft was punctured through and through at a point that's on the tip of the corona, in other words, facing away from the body, kosher, that's kosher. Nikva ha'atara atzma, if the corona itself got a hole, and the commentaries explain this means the thick, the ridge, let's call it, the ridge of the corona before it goes onto the rest of the shaft. If that got a hole, so then it depends. Im keshayire keri, teitze shichva zera min hanekev, if when this man experiences a seminal emission, the semen will emerge through this hole, pasul, that's disqualified. Nistam hanekev, but if that hole then gets stuffed or blocked, chazar lehechsheda, he returns to his kosher status. Nikav lemata me'atara, shekenegdoi lemayla b'soicha atara. Okay, physiologically speaking, if you know how the shaft works, it's actually on a diagonal. The corona is on a diagonal. When you're facing it from the top, the corona extends further back. But on the bottom, it's shorter. So if there's a puncture through and through that begins on the top, on the corona, but ends up on the bottom, past the corona, so then, counterintuitively, it's disqualified. In the last halacha we just said, a puncture above the corona completely is kosher. Below the corona completely is also kosher. But when it goes through and through, beginning on one side, ending on the other, it's disqualified. Why? Shaha'atara kula me'akeva, says the Rambam, because the ridge of the corona is essential. As we learned before, if you have a hole in the atara atzma, then it could cause a disqualification. So when a puncture begins on one side above and ends below, it has certainly passed through the area which corresponds to the ridge. And by cutting through on that point, it makes it disqualified. Halacha vav, nistam shvil shichva zera. If the tract through which the semen emerges was blocked, v'chazar liros shichva zera mishvil shemashtin bay, and the man begins to emit semen from the tract of urination. Harei pasul, this is disqualified. This halacha raises a big issue amongst modern day people that know anatomy because we don't have two tracts. There aren't two tracts in the way we know modern anatomy. The Chazon Ish was the first to mention this issue at length. And he says that either this was a phenomenon that wasn't so common, even in times of old, or nishtana hateva, the nature has changed. It used to be that the male anatomy system had two definitive tracts, and today we don't. Others suggest that this is a reference not to the tracts on the shaft, but more inside the body. When you go inside the body, there are definitely two areas where the semen develops and the urine develops. And that's what the Rambam is talking about. But on the simple understanding, it's talking about on the shaft itself. So if one tract was blocked and the other tract was still open, it doesn't matter, it's still disqualified because the natural reproductive tract was blocked. So this is all the halachas that deal with the shaft. Now let's talk about the halachas that deal with the testicles. Halacha zayin nichresu habeitzim ay achas mehen. If one or both of the testicles was completely severed, or it was wounded in a way that it was causing bleeding, or one of them was crushed, or one of them was lacking part of its material, or it got a puncture, in all these cases, disqualified. If one or more of the tracts, the semen tracts, were cut, nidach oy nifza, or crushed or wounded, harei ze pasul, that's also disqualified. Halacha ches. Nikav chut michutei habeitzim l'shvil miraglayim. Again, we'll have to deal with one of the pieces of commentary we mentioned before, but if one of the semen tracts got a hole into the urinary tract, and now the urine is emerging from two places, mishvil hamayim and mishvil shichva zera, from the urinary and seminal tract, harei ze kosher, that's still kosher, because it hasn't become completely blocked.
The thinking is the ability
to reproduce, yeah.
That's it.
The ability to reproduce, exactly. So in two halachas ago, when it became completely blocked, that's a cause for disqualification. Here, where there's simply a puncture between the two tracts, that's not a big deal. Halacha tes, kol psul she'amarnu be'inyan zeh, all disqualifying cases we mentioned in this topic, kishaloi hayu bidei shamayim, is when it did not happen by the hands of heaven. Kigoin shekarsei adam oy kelev, a man or a dog had severed the limb, or a thorn hit him, something like that. But if he was born this way, with the member severed or the testicles crushed, or born without testicles at all, or it was a bodily sickness that overtook him, and these limbs stopped working, they stopped functioning, or some kind of a boil developed around it and it began to disintegrate or sever. Such a person is still kosher to marry into the Jewish people, because all these blemishes are caused by the hands of heaven. Halacha Yud, on the topic of wounded reproductive systems, the Rambam says, Osur lahafsid evrei zera. It's forbidden for somebody else to destroy a male reproductive system. Bein ba'adam, bein b'behema chaya v'oif. Whether a human or an animal, beast or bird, reproductive organs. Echad tmeim ve'echad tehirim, kosher or non-kosher animals, bein be'eretz Yisrael, bein b'chutz ha'aretz, whether in Israel or outside of Israel. And this is interesting because Afal Pi Shenemar, in the verse where it talks about it, it says, Uba'artzechem lo yisa'asu. Do not do this in your land. This is talking about korbanot, sacrifices, which animals are fit. So it says, Ma'uch b'chasus v'nasuk b'charus. If an animal has crushed or maimed testicles, you don't bring it to the mizbeach. And in general, don't do such a thing in your land, which would seem to imply that the only prohibition is in Eretz Yisrael. But the Rambam says, Mipi Ashmu alamdu, we have an oral tradition, right back to Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai, Shedavar zeh nohig b'chol makom. That this matter applies everywhere. The inyan hakosov, and the Torah is telling us, in other words, the idea in the verse is, Lo ye'aseh zois b'Yisrael. This should not be done among the Jewish people. Huh? Yes, that's true. The context of this verse is talking about for animals. Nevertheless, it's learned that it applies to everybody. Bein begufan, bein beguf acherim. Whether on their own bodies or on the bodies of others. V'chol ha'misares, anybody who does castrate, loike min ha'torah b'chol makom, gets biblical lashes everywhere. V'afilu misares achar misares loike. Even if you castrate after castration. So you don't really add anything, technically, you still get lashes. Ketzad, what does that look like? Harei sheba echad v'karas esagid. One person comes and severs the shaft. Uba acher v'karas esabeitzim oy nitkan. Another person comes and severs the testicles, or at least detaches them from their point of connection in the body. Uba acher v'karas chutei beitzim. Someone else comes and severs the semen tracts. So they're all three parts of the organ are now cut off, but by three different people. Oy, or in one part of the organ. Sheba echad u'moach esagid. Uba acher v'nitkei, uba acher v'karsoi. One person crushes the shaft, second person detaches it, third person severs it completely. Kulan loikin, they all get the lashes. Even though the last guy castrated an already castrated person. Doesn't matter. Again, humans or animals are all included. If you castrate a female, whether human or another type, patur, you're exempt. Exempt means it's still forbidden, but you're exempt from the lashes. By the way, this has very big ramifications today in prostate surgeries. Doctors that are dealing with this field, the Rebbe has many letters where he would delineate all the potential issues. You have to really consult the rabbi about this. It's very, very not simple. Prostate cancer, it could get very, very halachically problematic as to how to do the surgery so that it shouldn't violate, exactly, violate the prohibition of castration. But only for men. That's the big issue here. Halacha Yud Bey is hamashke ikrin la'adam oy lishar minim kedei l'sarsai. If you give a potion to drink to a man or to an animal, with the purpose of castration, hareza asur ve'en leikin alav. It's forbidden. You don't get lashes. Ve'isha muteres lishtais ikrin kedei lesar sa'ad shalei tila. The woman could take a potion to begin with. It's permitted to stop her from giving birth. This is the source today for many rabbinic permissions about birth control. Yes, contraceptives. For women to take oral contraceptives, not anything internal, then it's allowed.
Does such a potion exist?
In those times?
Yeah.
Yeah, they had access to it. Different
You
herbal
don't have
mixtures.
it. You can't drink.
No, you can't. Yeah, you can't drink it. But apparently, they probably put together some things, and
Birth control.
yeah, the early birth control.
I'm talking about today.
Today, so again, it has to be done with rabbinic guidance, but under certain contexts, yeah, the rabbis will permit it. Only for the woman, though.
Right.
She can take the birth
What about
control.
vasectomy for a man?
Huh? Very not simple.
Very not simple or not allowed.
Mostly not allowed. Look, if there's life and death situations, you have to consult the rabbi. But I'm saying it's, yeah, typically,
Obviously it's not life
yeah.
and death. I mean,
No. If it's just a procedure, no. Just a procedure, then it's totally not allowed.
voluntary.
Yeah. Haresha kafa esa adam v'shisa by kelev. What if a person ties another person down and then incites a dog against him? Or shar chayas, or another animal. Ad sha'asa'u krus shavcha, till they make him with a severed member. Or you forced him in cold water or in snow till the system stopped functioning. You don't get lashes, you have to manually castrate. Here you did a cause that caused him to get castrated, but you didn't do it with your hands. The rabbis should give him rabbinic lashes. But biblically, you don't get punished. It's forbidden for a Jew to tell a non-Jew to castrate our animal. If the non-Jew took it on his own, did the castration, then it's permitted. What if a Jew made a trick? He didn't say it clearly, but he kind of implied to the non-Jew to do the matter. We find the man, we say he cannot use the animal, he has to sell it off to somebody else. But once you're selling it, you can sell it even to your own son, to your adult son. After he castrates it. To your minor son, who's really like an extension of you, you cannot sell it or give it. But to anybody else, you could. The idea is you don't want to benefit from the act that you did yourself or you caused to be done to this animal by giving it to a non-Jew.
Of the act? Why would he want to do it?
The animal to be castrated? Apparently they
Well, they use it for like horses.
they do better. They do better, so long as they're like,
Oh,
yeah.
So not because they didn't want him to produce more.
No. Simply for the what do they call them?
Geldings.
Geldings?
Geldings that are male horses that have been castrated.
Yeah, they have like an extra
Like the
strength or
race- if you're-
something.
Let's say you own race horses.
Yeah.
Apparently they geld them because they make
That's
them.
what geld means?
I think
The geld is the act of castration?
Yeah, I think it's.
Okay,
it's called
fascinating.
gelding. I'm not sure.
Good.